Good day, grade 12 learners of South Africa. We're doing life science. I hope you've tuned into the right station and the right channel, because we are working together and we're going to figure out the whole process of life science. We're going to be doing reproduction, and today we're continuing from our last session where we did hormonal control, we did spermatogenesis, now we're going to do oogenesis. Once we've done this, we move on to the whole fertilization process and then the growth of the little baby. All right, or the fetus is actually the correct wording to use, but it is that little baby that is being created and how it actually grows before it is born. All right, let's look at hormonal control of oogenesis. Now remember, oogenesis is because we are dealing with the female and we are dealing with the egg. So we want to produce an egg cell, and we want that egg cell to be ready. Now, how is it going to be released? First of all, hormones control the menstruation cycle, and that is the cycle that we are going to be working on here. What is the menstruation cycle? Well, it takes 28 days. 28 days for the cycle to occur. Now, in some females, it could be 25 days. In others, it could be 27 days. And in some, it's 28 days. Very rarely is it longer than 28 days, unless you are very, very stressed. All right, so when you are stressed, or when you are training very, very hard. So if you're a middle distance or a long distance athlete and you are doing really intensive training, you'll find that in a female you will lose your period. In other words, we lose the menstruation cycle. All right, now, only one egg. Now people, this is very important. Only one egg cell is released per cycle, one from the left ovary, and the next month it will be from the right ovary. So the ovaries take turns. Every now and again, you're going to find that the two ovaries both release an egg, and that is when we could end up with what we call paternal twins. And paternal twins will be two egg cells that are released. Two sperm cells fertilize those two egg cells, and a person then ends up with two babies that have their own chorion, they are completely separate entities. It's just that they were created at the same time. Whereas your maternal twins is when one egg cell allows one sperm cell in and then divides equally into two cells. All right, so we're going to do far more about that later on. Now, the menstruation cycle affects both the ovaries as well as the uterus. Now, think about it. Why would it be the ovaries and the uterus? Well, first of all, the ovary to release the egg. Okay, that's number one. So now once the egg is released, it is now ready to be fertilized. But in the meantime, where does this baby grow? Where does the embryo and the fetus grow? It grows in the uterus, which means the uterus lining must be ready to receive that little egg. And if it is, well, then implantation can occur. The little egg then grows into and becomes part of the endometrium, which is the inner lining of the uterus, through something called a placenta. And it's the placenta that then feeds that little embryo as it grows. All right. If no fertilization occurs, that uterine or endometrium tears away, because the uterus prepares itself in case fertilization happens the next time round. All right, so it has to be ready, and that's why the uterus is incredibly important in the menstruation cycle as well. Now, there's a hormone, or our hormones, the same as in the males. We have the gonadotrophins releasing hormones, and oh my gosh, it's far easier to just remember GnRH. But remember, your gonads are the sex organs of the body, or the sex cells of the body. It's where all the production will occur. So your gonadotrophin releasing hormone, and that's going to stimulate the anterior pituitary gland. And what does it do? It releases follicle stimulating hormone, or just FSH. So we have the GnRH, and the GnRH is going to stimulate the pituitary gland to release follicle stimulating hormone. Why? Because it's in the follicle that the little egg cell develops. And we want that little follicle to be released, because if it bursts, the egg cell in the follicle to be released, and when the follicle bursts, the little egg cell is then ready for, that's what we call ovulation, and it's then ready for fertilization. So this is the diagram or the schematic representation of hormonal control. People, it is incredibly important that you understand this whole process. Now, what have we got? We have ovulation period across down the middle, and we have, so all the way down here, and we have the new cycle begins there again. But it's approximately 28 days, and this is where menstruation will occur. All right, and this will be the first part. So the cycle starts. Your cycle as a female starts on day 1, and that day 1 is the first day of menstruation. All right, so that is how your cycle runs. The last day, just before you start menstruating, it should be day 28 if you have a normal cycle. It will be 28. That is the last day of your cycle. Your first day starts with menstruation. So let's have a look. What we've got here, we've got the concentration of the gonadotrophins. We have got the concentrations of the hormones in the ovary, which is estrogen and progesterone. And we have in the ovary what is going on, and we have the thickness of the endometrium. So what we've done is we've put all the different processes that assist in reproduction are here. And it's almost like having 4 different sets of graphs or representations of processes that are going to occur. So we say, let's first look at our hormones. So here we have our follicle stimulating hormone, and it increases at this point here. So if we do, so it will increase at this point here. While that is increasing, look at our estrogen. Our estrogen levels are going to decrease. And as our estrogen levels decrease, what are we going to have here? In the ovary, we've got the primary oocyte, and so it develops into the secondary oocyte, and now here at this point we now have the Graafian follicle. And so this is our first process here. What happened? Follicle stimulating hormone, which is going to stimulate our Graafian follicle, which is a follicle. So follicle stimulating hormone. Has it done its job? Yes, it has. As it starts to decline, our follicle is now ready. In the meantime, in the uterus, what happens? Menstruation has occurred here. So with the release of follicle stimulating hormone and the decrease of the estrogen, the increase of the estrogen, we are now going to have the endometrium lining getting nice and thick. Why? It's preparing for implantation. So if this little egg is fertilized, then it has a nice little place to get into the lining and implant. All right, now, if we look here, we've got our luteinizing hormone sits here and it starts to increase. Now, what is the luteinizing hormone? We want it to cause the release of progesterone. And you'll see here the progesterone levels increase drastically. As they increase, what happens? Here we have the corpus luteum. And what is the corpus luteum's function? It's to make sure that there is an increased release of progesterone. Why? The progesterone is going to keep that baby there. And then look at the lining. The lining is beautifully thick. Now, fertilization does not occur. No fertilization occurs. The corpus luteum is now going to disintegrate. And as it disintegrates, so the progesterone level is now going to decrease, all right? And as that decreases, so this start of menstruation occurs again. So this is the whole process. So we have our follicle stimulating hormone. It increases and then causes the increase of estrogen. Estrogen increasing, but you see how low the progesterone is here. Estrogen increases to allow for the follicle, which is the Graafian follicle, to get ready to burst and release our little egg cell. So the egg cell is now released and it sits in the fallopian tube. If no fertilization occurs, it does not implant and menstruation occurs because the lining has to tear away to prepare for a new lining. So this tears away, and now the new lining can start again over here. All right, the corpus luteum forms immediately after the egg cell is released and causes an increase in the progesterone level. And as the progesterone level increases, well, the lining is then perfect, but no fertilization, the lining disintegrates, the corpus luteum disintegrates, and the progesterone level then just dips down completely. And it's this lack of estrogen, look here, you've got a lack of estrogen and progesterone at this point, and this is what results in your premenstrual tension or premenstrual stress. And PMS or PMT is actually a very real fact, because remember, on a very basic level in our brains, we want to procreate. We were put on this earth to procreate. And when that does not happen and it has not been successful, the brain says, oh dear. And it's the lack of those hormones that actually makes some women, all women will respond, but some women have a greater depression, if you can call it that, 2-3 days before menstruation occurs, whereas others feel absolutely no effect. But it is a mental thing that no one can control. It is hormones. All right, and remember, your nervous system and your endocrine system, which works with the hormones, work like this. They work together. Okay, now we're going to go to the wording of what we've just looked at, and I'm going to refer back to the diagram if need be. We have the follicle-stimulating hormone, and it's transported via the blood. Let's just put here via blood, because that's how your hormones get around your body, is via the blood, and it goes to the ovaries. And what does a hormone do? Remember, hormones can do nothing. They don't actually go and do the job. What hormones do is they will tell in inverted commas, the organ or the tissue to do or perform a specific function. It would be like if you had a 5-year-old child having a bath, they leave that bathroom in the most amazing state, and they won't clean it unless your mom comes along and says, excuse me, clean this bathroom, and then they'll do the job. Now that is how a hormone works. A hormone gives instructions, and the organ will not do anything unless it is told to do it. So FSH is released via the blood, and it travels to the ovaries where it stimulates the development of the follicle. All right, now the granulosa cells in the developing follicle produce a hormone called estrogen. Estrogen has 2 target organs. Now this is very important because they will ask you in an exam, what are the functions of estrogen? So please make sure that you know this. I'm going to put NB here. All right, you must know what estrogen does. It has 2 target organs, and they are the uterus and the pituitary gland. Okay, so what does it do? First of all, in the uterus, estrogen causes the development of the endometrium. Why? We need to develop that lining. You see, we need to develop the lining. And that's one of the functions of estrogen, is to make sure that this lining here is getting ready so that implantation can occur. And it is estrogen that will tell this lining to do that. All right, then that's the first thing it does. The second function of estrogen is that it inhibits. Now look at this, it inhibits. When something is stimulated, we know that it is stimulated to work. So it wants to do the thing. But if it is inhibited, to inhibit something is not to stop it. To inhibit, if you stop something, you stop it dead and it doesn't happen. But what estrogen does, or what hormones do, is they will inhibit. So if you can imagine you want to lift your arms and someone comes behind you and they hold your arms, you just can't move your arms until they let go. And then you are no longer inhibited. So they don't stop you, they're just stopping you for a little period of time. And that's how you need to think of inhibit. And that's how hormones work. It's very important that you know that. All right, so estrogen will inhibit the secretion of follicle-stimulating hormone because you've now stimulated the follicle, okay, by the anterior lobe of the pituitary, so that no further follicles are produced. okay, during pregnancy, and we have high estrogen levels, will trigger the secretion of luteinizing hormone. And luteinizing hormone is going to cause the development of, or the formation of, the corpus luteum. Luteinizing hormone, corpus luteum. So estrogen wants the follicle, the Graafian follicle, to get ready to release the egg. Now, when people take fertility drugs, what the fertility drug does is it's got a lot of estrogen in it, and it will cause the release of many follicles, which are then taken out of the body, and fertilization occurs outside of the body, and we call that in vitro fertilization. They'll then take these fertilized little structures and put them back into the uterus. All right, and they do many. They do 5, 6 sometimes. Why? Because they don't all implant into the uterine wall. All right, now the LH is released into the blood, and now remember it's a hormone, luteinizing hormone, and it's released into the blood, and where does it go? It goes to the ovary and causes ovulation. All right, ovulation is the release of the secondary oocyte by the Graafian follicle. The LH stimulates the Graafian follicle to develop into the corpus luteum, and it's the corpus luteum that will then release progesterone. Okay, so now once that progesterone is released, what does it do? That hormone will now cause the following. Number 1, it ensures the thickening of the endometrium continues and it is maintained. Okay, and that there is glandular activity. Why? Because remember, those glands are going to secrete everything that that little structure, the embryo, is going to need. We then have progesterone, and what's that going to do? It's going to inhibit the anterior lobe from producing or releasing LH, and also estrogen release. Why? We don't want estrogen to be released because the lining has already been built. Okay, we don't, because estrogen, remember, causes the lining to be released, to be built. So it's been done. So we don't need estrogen. Also, estrogen is going to cause the Graafian follicle to release the egg cell or get the egg cell ready for release. But if it does that, we don't need more egg cells to be released. So we must say, okay, hold on. Something's got to say to the brain, stop causing the release of estrogen and follicle stimulating hormone. Because we've done now. We've done that part of the process. We have to continue. So please, this is very important. Progesterone is going to, first of all, make sure that the endometrium stays as it is. Number 2, it's going to inhibit the release of luteinizing hormone and estrogen. All right? And then the release of progesterone causes a slight rise in the temperature just after the female has ovulated. And that's quite important because that's used in the rhythm method. Then if fertilization does not take place, the corpus luteum degenerates. Okay? So when that corpus luteum, because there's no reason for the corpus luteum to stay there and continue to release progesterone because, well, fertilization didn't happen. So you don't want to keep the egg cell in the uterus because it has not been fertilized. No implantation has occurred. The result is the decrease in the levels of estrogen and progesterone throughout the whole lot. So if we go back to our diagram, look at this. Both your estrogen and your progesterone is going to dip down over here if fertilization does not occur. The endometrium breaks down, all right? And what happens? It tears away. Now, for the gentlemen out there, I promise you now, listen to these words, and maybe you will have sympathy with the female counterparts in your family and those that are around you. That lining tears away, and it is very real, and it is very painful. In most cases, it's painful. So the lining tears away from the walls of the uterus, causing bleeding associated with menstruation. All right, and menstruation lasts for approximately 5 days. Here again, if the cycle is a 28-day cycle, menstruation could be anything from 3.5 to 5 days. If it's longer than 5 days, ladies, then you need to go and see a doctor. It should not be longer than 5 days. All right. if you're running a 28-day cycle. If you're running less than that, then menstruation should never be more than 3 to 4 days. All right, so we're going to look at this question. This question was taken from Life Science, clearly, the November 2009 paper 1. So this was the paper, this was a question paper for the end of last year. Please, 2009, very important. They changed slightly the way that questions are asked, and this is why we go through these questions, to show you what it is the examiners are going to expect from you. First thing, we have to look at this diagram. Now, it's the one we've just done. It's the graph, shows the menstrual cycle and the influence of the different hormones. So, here they show you the pituitary hypothesis hormones. And what do we have? We've got the follicle stimulating hormone, and then it dips down, it peaks, and then it runs parallel. But here it is low. The same with your luteinizing hormone. It goes along, it's the dotted line, and then it peaks high here, and then it drops down. So you remember, it is your luteinizing hormone that's going to cause ovulation. The growth of the follicle, this is how the follicle develops. So you get your secondary oocyte. Here is your Graafian follicle, and this is what you will do on your diagram as well for yourself. You'll write GF, the Graafian follicle. Here you're going to write ovulation, so that you're reminding yourself what on earth this is about. You're basically saying to your brain, pull out those files. All right, then we have the ovarian hormone levels. Look, as the follicle stimulating hormone is there, the estrogen is there. The estrogen climbs. And as this estrogen climbs, what does it do? It helps with, first of all, the Graafian follicle to develop. Secondly, this lining to start developing, exactly as we've just looked, as we've done now. Then the luteinizing hormone peaks so that this structure, the Graafian follicle, releases the egg at ovulation. And here we have our Corpus Luteum. And remember, the Corpus Luteum is now going to cause an increase in the progesterone level. So there we have it. And the lining is wonderfully thick, and it's ready for implantation. It's ready for that implantation. Now, your hormonal regulation, and you see here, 0 to about 5 days is menstruation. And then we have, so here are 5 days here. There, day 7, we now have the lining starting to get ready and to develop. And then on day 28, it just goes zhoops, and we start to break it down again. Now, let's look at our questions. On which day does ovulation take place? Now, people, really, you should know this anyway, without even checking this whole schedule. But if you look here, when did ovulation take place? And they've actually drawn a line for you all the way down. It is on day 14. So, okay, or you are going to write 14th day. But please put the word day, all right? It's not just 14. 14 what? It's on day 14 or 14th day. Between which days does menstruation take place? We don't even have to look back at that. Menstruation takes place between day 0 and day 7. Or you could have said day 1 and day 7. Or you could have said day 0 and day 6. Or you could have said day 1 and day 6. So that's approximately, because remember, you've got to finish up. So you'll still drip a little bit on the 6th day, but there you go. Okay? Any one of those answers would have been correct. State any one function, so one function of luteinizing hormone. Now really think about it. What does it do? It stimulates, and I'm just going to put stim, the development of the Graafian follicle. Now, you're going to have to write this out. You can't use my abbreviations. I'm going as fast as I'm going. Okay, or you could have said it causes the follicle to burst. And what does it do when it bursts? What does it do when it bursts? It releases the egg cell. But it's only when the follicle bursts. Or you could have said that it stimulates, just STIM, stimulates the formation of the corpus luteum. But any one of those three, now if you write all three in an exam, they're only going to mark the first one. So it's only one mark, only asking you for one function. So any one of those three functions. Then describe the changes in the level of the LH shown in the graph. Now if we go back, so they want to know what happens here to the LH. So what happens? The LH level remains constant or relatively constant at quite a low level up until about day 13. Because if we look down here, this will be about day 13. So, and I'm not going to write this, people, so listen. So first of all, the LH level remains low, but consistently low until about day 12, 13. It's about there, all right? And then what happens? It increases. And as it increases sharply on day 14, what does that do? It's going to cause the ovulation. But that's not part of this question. They want to know what happens to the LH. So it stays relatively low and constant until it gets to day 12 or 13. Then it starts to peak, and it peaks at day 14. All right, once it's done that, it starts to decrease sharply. You see that? And then it remains low until menstruation occurs. All right? And all you're doing is you're describing what you are seeing here on this line. What do you see? And that's the easiest marks of the lot, because you're just saying here, what do my eyes see? Okay, we've done that. And that's going to give you 3 marks. The fact that it stays low, it peaks, and then it stays low again. Describe the relationship between the level of estrogen and the endometrium from day 7 to day 14. Now, we went through this, but we'll do it again just to refresh your memory. So what they're saying is between day 7 and day 14, they want you to explain what happens to the endometrium. Now, remember, you've got to say why. So you say, as the estrogen level increases, so the thickness of the endometrium will increase. And that's your marks. You are reading everything. It's everything you can see from this diagram, people. Okay, then explain why it is necessary for the level of progesterone in the blood to increase after ovulation. Now, people think about this. What does it do? What is its function? Because we're talking about progesterone. What is its function? It has to maintain the increased thickness and glandular activity, or glandular nature, I would say activity, of the endometrium. It's got to make sure it stays thick and that those glands are working. It's the glandular activity, because the more glandular activity, clearly you're going to have blood activity as well. You're going to have an increase of blood supply. And why? Because it must be, in other words, the endometrium, because it must be ready for implantation. And that's where your marks are going to be. It's the increased thickness, and it must, and the glandular activity for implantation to occur. All right. Did fertilization take place in the 28th day cycle illustrated in this graph? No. Why? Because they show menstruation occurred. All right. So there's no way. So we just write no. It's only 1 mark. They haven't asked for you to explain your answer in that question. But in question 8, they do. They say, explain your answer to question 7. And that would have been quite simply the progesterone level has dropped. Now try and remember that your progesterone starts with a P, pregnancy starts with a P. So the progesterone level has dropped, or you could have said the corpus luteum degenerates, or you could have said that the FSH level starts to increase towards the end of the cycle. And any one of these answers would have given you 2 marks. All right? So really not a difficult section. Make sure that you understand and that you know how those different graphs work together. So you're looking at your FH, your gonadotrophins, you're looking at the follicle stimulating hormone and your luteinizing hormone, how that affects the estrogen and progesterone, how it affects the development of the Graafian follicle and the corpus luteum, and then the lining of the uterus, because they all 4 work together. Without them, fertilization you can have 20,000 eggs being fertilized. But if that uterus is not ready for implantation, nothing is going to happen. All right, here we go. Fertilization, pregnancy, and birth. People, remember, first thing that has to happen is meiosis. Meiosis must occur. What do we end up with? We end up with haploid sperm cells, and we end up with haploid egg cells. All right, now, those haploid sperm cells and the haploid egg cells are going to do what? We're going to bring the 2 of them together during a process called fertilization. So, reproduction is the process to bring the sperm cells and the egg cells so fertilization can occur. And when we get the egg cell and the sperm cell joining, we end up with a diploid zygote. All right, now, the zygote is going to have a combination of hereditary characteristics from the mother, where the egg cell came from, and from the father, where the sperm cell came from. But please remember that during meiosis 1, during prophase 1, we have crossing over taking place. And when that crossover takes place, pieces from the maternal and the paternal chromosomes are going to break off. Secondly, during meiosis 1, but when we look at metaphase 1, and those chromosomes now start to pull towards the poles, they pull randomly. So not all the chromosomes that were mainly from the mother, with pieces from the father, chromosomes or paternal chromosomes, are going to pull in one direction. They separate randomly, and that is what assists us with diversity and all the variety that you end up with. You are a fruit salad, if you can call it that, of your great-great-great-grandparents on the one side and your great-great-great-great-great, all your great-grandparents on the other side. And you are this fruit salad. And what goes into this fruit salad every time is absolutely unique. So there is no other being like you. Please remember that, people, because it's because of meiosis that this can take place. Right, so we have this zygote is a combination of those hereditary characteristics, and it forms from the zygote, which is just a diploid structure, and that starts to undergo mitosis, and mitosis is for growth, and then it will develop into the embryo, and then it develops into the fetus, and this little fetus will then be born, and then we call it a baby. All right, so those are the terms you need to use. You've got the zygote, and as soon as mitosis starts to occur, we now have an embryo. And in humans, that embryo is going to develop into a fetus. All right, now, the female gives birth to ensure the survival and continuation of the species, and that's the whole reason why we do this. Now, here we get to an interesting part, and it is sexual intercourse. Now, at this point, I think it's very important that the boys and the girls, or the young gentlemen and the young ladies out there, understand we are doing this as a biological process. And I'm going to say words and I'm going to be going through processes. And when your teachers do this in class, please try to be mature about it, because it makes it very difficult when a person is standing there trying to teach. I think if you're a male and you're teaching boys only, or a female and you're teaching girls only, it's better. But when you're teaching girls and boys that are mixed in a co-ed type school, it becomes very difficult. So don't make it difficult for your teachers, please. All right, so here we go. First things is humans reproduce by internal fertilization. We are not like frogs and salmon that lay eggs. The females lay the eggs and the males come and spray their sperm over the top. That is outside of the body. We have internal fertilization. That's why we produce so much less young than a frog does or a fish does. We only have 1 or 2 babies at a time. Okay, look, some people have 5 or 6, but we have 1 or 2. All right. Normally, sperm cells are inserted into the vagina and the female by a process called, you've got to know this process, is copulation. The female must receive stimulation, the male must receive stimulation of the parasympathetic nervous system, and that will cause vasodilation. You've got to know this term here. And if you look at your X sheets, on the X sheet, what we've done is we've given you all the definitions, all the biological terms that you must know. And in there, you're going to find copulation, you're going to find the vasodilation. Vasodilation means that the blood vessels dilate. When those blood vessels dilate, they become larger, and it means that more blood can flow into the erectile tissue, which is in the penis. And then the penis can become erect. A penis that is not erect cannot get the sperm into the female. And because we need to make sure that the process occurs properly and that the sperm is inserted inside the female, the penis has to be erect for that. All right? As the penis becomes erect, clearly the urethra closes, and we did this when we did the male reproductive system. Now, with sexual intercourse, there's going to be rhythmic movement, and during the copulation process, and what happens is that the smooth muscle, remember this is all uncontrolled muscle. It's not like skeletal muscle where we can, look what I'm doing, I can move my fingers, that is because I want to. Here we're talking about smooth muscles. So of the epididymis, now remember the epididymis, the vas deferens, the seminal vesicles are very important, the Cowper's gland, and the prostate gland. Those are the 3 glands that secrete fluids. What do? They respond by contracting. When they contract, the process that occurs is ejaculation, and that is when the sperm and the fluid, which is the semen, is released into the female. Now, you will recall when we did the male reproductive system, we said that the semen is alkali. Why? Because first of all, it has to neutralize any urine residue that may be in the penis and in the urethra. Okay, that's number 1. But more importantly, it has to reduce or decrease the acidity of the vagina, because too much acid will kill the sperm, and we don't want that. We want it as close to neutral as possible. So it's the semen that then changes the female's vaginal acidity to a pH of 6. And you need to know this. All right. With that, the sperm is deposited into the vagina close to the cervix. And the cervix, remember, sits like this. And here is the vagina. And the sperm will then go through the cervix into the uterus. All right, so it has to go through the cervix. Sperm swim by the cilia, and they travel into the uterus and all the way up into the fallopian tubes. Now, people, a reminder, fertilization occurs in the fallopian tubes. And sometimes you will hear that females have a tube pregnancy. And that's when the little egg cell is fertilized in the fallopian tube, and somehow it doesn't continue to move down into the uterus. And then it starts to grow, and it can cause major issues when the little egg or when the embryo gets so big that it actually tears the fallopian tube. Okay, the sperms survive in the fallopian tubes for 3 days. And that's very important, because if the egg cell is not ready to accept a sperm cell in those 3 days, then the sperm die and no fertilization will occur. A female can only be impregnated if the egg is ready during ovulation. And if that egg is not ready, no fertilization will occur. All right, people, we now look at the fertilization process. The first thing you need to know is the definition of fertilization. That is the fusion, very important, of the sperm nucleus, which remember is haploid, with the egg nucleus, which is also going to be haploid, to form a diploid zygote, which is going to be 2N. The diploid zygote contains 46 chromosomes, where we got 23, the haploid in the male gamete, and the sperm cell, and 23 from the egg cell or the female gamete. Now, if we look here, capsitation has to take place in the fallopian tubes, and this is where the sperm cells mature. Once they have matured, the enzymes are released as the sperm head comes into contact with the jelly coat around the egg. Now, there's a nice soft little jelly coat to protect that little egg cell. And what happens is it's going to start softening the glycoproteins around the egg cell. So it's the enzymes that the little sperm cell releases. Now, with that, only the head and the neck of the sperm will enter the egg cell. So it's only the head. Why? It contains the nucleus. And we need that nucleus because it contains the chromosomes, where the neck is probably just the piece that ends up inside, and it's worthless anyway. It's just a little bit of a couple of cells, and it enters the egg cell. Now, the tail is discarded outside the egg. Now, I'm sure you've seen pictures where you've got the egg and you've got a whole bunch of little sperm cells all around this little egg cell. And the egg cell is only going to allow one little sperm cell that it chooses to go in. As soon as that sperm cell goes in, it closes off and the tail remains behind, and only the head containing the nucleus and a piece of the neck will go in. When the sperm cell enters the egg cell, a membrane immediately forms around the egg to prevent any other sperm from entering it. So we only end up ever with one egg cell plus one sperm cell. As soon as that sperm cell goes in, the membrane closes up and there is no way any other sperm cell can enter. Two nuclei fuse and then the fertilization process occurs. Once fertilization has taken place, we now have a diploid zygote. And we say conception is complete. So we have copulation, which will then, copulation is the process to get the sperm cells into the female's vagina. The sperm cells travel up through the cervix, up through the uterus, and into the fallopian tubes. Sorry, the sperm cells are going to go into both. So they'll go left and right. Now remember, every second month, the ovaries will release an egg cell. So from the right and from the left and from the right and from the left and from the right. But the sperm go into both. If an egg cell is there and it's ready and it's waiting and the right little sperm cell gets there, it goes in because of the glycoproteins that are dissolved, and it goes in. As it goes in, the membrane closes up. Now, is nature not amazing? How does the egg cell know when a sperm cell is in? How does it know which sperm cell is entered? But whichever sperm cell it is, the minute it goes into that egg, it closes up with this membrane so that no other sperm cells can come in. And that is conception. And it is magic. Now, ovulation, here we go. this is ovulation to implantation. So what we've got here is a diagram of the female uterus, and we have the fallopian tubes or oviducts, if you choose to call them that. And then we have our fimbriae around here, and there's where our ovary sits. Now remember, the ovary is held onto this whole process here, and it's held in place because of tendons and ligaments. Now, as the process occurs, we know that we're going to have the release of the egg cell from the ovary, and that is called, let's give it a, that is the process of ovulation. All right, once ovulation has occurred, the egg cell is released. These fimbriae here are literally people like fingers, and they make a sort of a wave-like motion, which then directs this egg cell into the fallopian tube. So those fimbriae play a very important, they're like these, if you can think of a sea anemone and the moving of those tentacles, well, that's exactly what it's like, except that it's a wave-like motion to get the ovule here, at least the egg cell, into the ovary. All right, as it moves in here, there's a little egg cell, and remember, it is haploid. It moves up through the fallopian tube, and at this point, approximately, is where fertilization is going to occur. Now, if fertilization occurs, we now have a diploid zygote. All right, now, there's mitosis. Remember, mitosis must occur. Why? Because we now need growth. And mitosis was for growth, for repair, for replacement of damaged cells, and then reproduction in unicellular organisms. This is a multicellular organism. All right, now, mitosis is going to result in growth, and then it goes from 1 to 2. So we now have a 2-celled embryo. And look at the term. It's gone from a zygote. As soon as mitosis starts to occur, it becomes an embryo. Now, the embryo will then undergo mitosis a second time. So we go from 2 cells to 4 cells, and we call that a 4-celled embryo. Then it undergoes mitosis again. So each of those 4 cells will undergo mitosis, and we now end up with an 8-celled embryo. That 8-celled embryo, when it multiplies again or undergoes mitosis again, it develops into something called a morula. And the morula is our first real structure. But you see how it starts to move along, and it's pushed along the fallopian tube by little contractions which are very similar to peristalsis. Remember, you did peristalsis when you did nutrition? Very similar peristaltic movements and little cilia that push the little egg along this whole fallopian tube. It sort of pushes it along step by step. So here fertilization took place, then mitosis, the first lot of mitosis, second lot of mitosis, third lot of mitosis, and we now end up with a morula. Here is the uterus, and you'll see the lining here looks great. I mean, look at this lining. It's a lovely thick lining here. And if you also consider that in this lining you've got like little channels into the lining, and those little channels are where implantation can take place. So this little morula now develops into something called a blastocyte. So from a morula into a blastocyte. Cyte, a lot of tissue cells. Okay, and look at this little structure, and it's got like a little membrane around it and lots of little cells. Then we have the early stages of implantation. Now this little blastocyte starts to develop little finger-like structures called fimbriae as well. So we had fimbriae here at the end of the ovary, and it starts to develop these little fimbriae. And those little fimbriae, if you think of dough, all right, think of a ball of dough. And you've got this little egg cell, and it's got fimbriae, which are like your fingers. And you stick your fingers into the dough. That is quite literally what the fimbriae start to do, except the dough is the wonderful, thick, glandular, well supplied with blood lining of the uterus. It's the endometrium of the uterus. And the fimbriae will then start to grow into the endometrium. All right, endo meaning the inner layer of the uterus. All right, people, this is ovulation and implantation. They love this question. The chances of you getting something like that in an exam, whether it is a test, a group test, whether it is a mid-year exam, whether it's prelims or finals, this is ovulation to implantation, all in one diagram. And if they give this to you, it's a piece of cake. They can give this to you as well as the different hormone levels, and you'll have to understand what's going on here. All right, at this point, lots of progesterone is being released as well to make sure that little egg stays where it is. So, fertilization takes place in the fallopian tubes. We've gone through that. The zygote is pushed towards the uterus by muscle contractions. It's a form of peristalsis. The process takes about 3 days. Everything takes 3 days. The sperm only live for 3 days as well in the fallopian tubes. The zygote undergoes mitosis, and it divides to form a solid ball called a morula. That is after the 8th mitotic set. After 6 days, so now we've got 3 days, 6 days, it's double the amount, this morula develops into a blastula, and it attaches to the lining, and that is called implantation. All right, very, very interesting process. Once implantation has taken place, the female is classified as pregnant. Why? Conception has occurred. The egg has now, the egg cell, the fertilized zygote has now undergone mitosis, and there's a very real process that's occurring. As soon as those fimbriae from the blastula start growing into the endometrium, then we say the girl is pregnant, and that takes about 6 days from conception. So that is why you're going to miss the period, and that's how women generally know, oops, I think I'm pregnant. But you could also miss your period because you are stressed. You could also miss your period because you've had a huge big shock, or if you're physically ill. Okay? Lots of things can cause the missing of a period or the menstruation cycle. But at this point, if you think ovulation is at day 14, and we end up with 6 days from day 14 is day 20. So by then, if implantation has taken place, you will not secrete the endometrium. The endometrium will not tear away, menstruation will not take place. The outer layer of the blastula is called the trophoblast, and that develops into the chorion, which is also quite important. The chorion is finger-like projections, and they grow into those fimbriae, they grow into the endometrium, and their main function is to anchor that embryo and increase the surface area for the absorption of nutrients, which it does from the glandular process. Now, if we look at this question here, it's typical. The diagram below represents the part of the female reproductive system after copulation. Now, in other words, copulation, putting the sperm inside the female. Okay, so what they've done is, here's your diagram. Let me just move this down a little bit. Here is the diagram. I'm going to need pen. And we have, first thing you do, you label. You get any diagram in an exam, people, you label it. First, we are going to label this. Now, this structure here would be the ovary. Then this structure here, it's this releasing process, because you see it's pointing to the arrow, that would be ovulation. Okay? Now, once we've got ovulation occurring, this little structure here is our egg cell. But it's pointing to a part in the egg cell. It could also be the haploid nucleus. So I would just put egg cell and put haploid behind it. All right? This process then continues. Here the sperm flows into the egg. So this would be fertilization. All right? As it goes along now, you've got the peristaltic movements moving this little egg along. And I would say that the E is pointing to this structure here. So that would be the fallopian tube. If we've now got our, okay, they've left out a step here because there you're going to have your two-celled zygote. There's lots here. So this is probably, they're referring to the morula. All right, the morula then develops into the blastocyte. This here, endometrium. All right, and then H is our little sperm cell. And remember, sperm cells are haploid. All right, once you have labeled everything, now we can move on to our actual questions. So first question, give the labels for A, E, and G. Well, we did that. A is going to be the ovary. B would be ovulation. And it was A, E, and G is the endometrium. All right. Name the process that takes place in B. It's ovulation. When during the menstruation cycle does the process mentioned in question 2 take place? Now, people, all you have to do is think about it. It's going to be about day 14, okay? About day 14, if it is a normal 28-day process. Now, we are talking here about the average, the norm, so you would say approximately day 14, all right? Describe the process represented in D. Now, they're talking about the process of ovulation. And I think, let's just have a look at our diagram here. Oh, they're talking about fertilization. So, if we talk about fertilization, how does that process occur? It is very, very simple. We are going to have a haploid sperm cell fuses with, and you'll see there are things that I keep repeating because they go into questions. Haploid sperm cell fuses with a haploid egg cell to form a, come on, I can hear you, diploid, correct, zygote. Now, you can't tell me fertilization is difficult, hey? I mean, look at this. Whoops, whoops. We've already got about 5 or 6 marks here, and you shouldn't have to have learned this because we've gone over it again and again. All right, so we've now described the process of fertilization. Write down the number of chromosomes that will be represented by the cells, by the nucleus in the following. We're looking at C, F, and H. So let's look. C, F, and H. So C would be haploid. F, the morula, is going to be diploid. And H is our sperm cell, is haploid. So it's haploid, diploid, haploid. That would be haploid, diploid, and haploid. Or you could have written out the word haploid, diploid, and haploid. All right, people, let's look at pregnancy. Now, remember, what is pregnancy? Pregnancy is the gestation period while that embryo becomes a fetus inside the female's uterus. All right, so it's the development of that little embryo inside a uterus. This process is also called gestation because gestation comes from it having to germinate. And germinate is generally for plants, gestation is for animals. It's the pregnancy period. And it's only used for mammals. All right, gestation is only used for mammals. So we have this gestation period. In plants, plants germinate, animals being our little animals, our mammals. Now, the embryo develops as follows. Now, if we look at how the embryo develops, what I've got is a series of diagrams here. You're going to find in week 1, that's when fertilization took place. These little things that look like little stars here, these are all the little sperm cells. And they are basically attacking this poor little egg cell because they're looking for a way to get in so fertilization can take place. Then in our second week, this structure here is going to be our blastula or blastocyst. Okay? Then this is embryo stage week 3. Now look, we've gone from a diploid zygote to an embryo. And this little thing here, and even at week 4 and at week 5 to 7, all our vertebrates follow the same development process. From here, things start changing. So here the tail will grow long if it's a reptile, or if it's a fish, it will start to develop all kinds of other structures. But this is one of the things that they base evolution on, and they say that's called embryology. And they look at the embryo development of all the different vertebrates and organisms on this earth. And they say that there is a commonality here. So based on that commonality, the theory is that evolution did take place. All right, now people look at this, and this is why I put these diagrams in. This is at this point we now start looking not at an embryo, but we start looking at we start calling it a fetus. And this fetus is 8 weeks, that would be about 2 months, to 11 weeks. That is approximately 2 to 3 months. Okay? It has little fingers, it has little toes, it has eyes and ears and a mouth and a nose. This little structure here, for all intents purposes, is a little being. It cannot survive on its own without support, but it has the umbilical cord feeding it at this point. It has a heart, it has lungs, all the different structures that you have. So just remember this diagram. Then we move on to from 16 weeks, so this is approximately 4 months. So the fetus stage is from 16 weeks, and here 20 to 36 weeks, and then 37 to 40 weeks. It's not quite 9 months. We're looking at 40 weeks, because 9 months would only be 36 weeks. So it's about 40 weeks that we need to work on. So not months, but weeks. And there is the little baby. All right, now question 2. Pregnancies in schoolgirls. Now, these are the kind of questions you can expect. Why? Because they want to see whether you've learned anything, what your morals are like, what your value systems are like. Now, you're right. There is no real answer. No one can criticize you, but you need to back your answers up. And if you can back them up with fact, then your answers would be acceptable. So here we go. We're going to give some theory, but some of it is going to be application of that theory, and you're going to incorporate your values in as well. So here we go. Question 2. Pregnancies in schoolgirls are an increasing deep concern. The table below shows the number of pregnancies recorded in girls at one of the schools in the province over the past 8 years. So they've done it over 8 years. The annual enrollment number of the girls is also indicated. It is mixed. It is a mixed school, and the numbers are arbitrary. All right, so they've given you all the information. So here we go. Here's the table, and they'll say, in 1989, there were 3 pregnancies, and look, the number of girls was 406. Then the number of girls goes down a little bit, it decreases, then it increases again, then it decreases, and it sort of stabilizes at around about 400, dips down again, up again, and then increases. So it's not quite consistent. They don't have exactly the same number of girls every year. The number of pregnancies, 3, 4, 2, 4, 10, 11, 9, 12. So what does that tell you? Look, just look at this and see what you see. From 1989 to 1992, very few pregnancies. And then all of a sudden, it just goes zhui and up. I mean, here you've got 10, 11, 9, 12 pregnancies. And the number of learners here, I mean, if you think of 10 pregnancies out of 400 girls, 11 pregnancies out of 383 girls, there's a huge increase there. All right, so first question. How many cases of pregnancy were recorded over the period of 8 years? So if we look at the number of, it's a simple addition. So add all of these up, And if you add them up, it's 7, I need a calculator, 7, 9, that's 13, 23, 33, 34, 44, 51. So you've got about 51 pregnancies that have, but just add them up. I mean, I've just gone very quickly. So you would have the number of cases of pregnancy, you're simply adding. What was the average annual number of pregnancies over this period? Show your calculations. So if you have to do something like that, you would say here, your average annual number of pregnancies, we're going to have to add these properly. So let's do it. That's 20, 30, 32, 42, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55. So we're looking at number of cases, 55 what? Pregnancies. Nuncies. You need to get into the habit of writing what it is you're giving the number for. So 55 pregnancies, okay? What was the average annual number of pregnancies over this period? So we have to show our calculation. So we would take 56 pregnancies. We're going to divide it by the 8 years that they've given us. And 56 divided by 8, 55, sorry. 55 divided by 58 is about 7. So 7 8s are 56. So approximately 7. 7 what? It's going to be 7 pregnancies. Because you're looking at the average annual number of pregnancies. All right, in which 2 years, now they're asking you, which 2 years was the enrollment number of the girls in the school the same? So people really if you get anything less than full marks there, I don't know. So all you're doing is you're looking at when is the enrollment number the same? Well, clearly it's going to be 1990 and 1994. In which 2 years was there a decrease in the number of pregnancies recorded? So let's have a look at where there was a decrease in the number of pregnancies recorded. All you need to do is look, but now remember, decrease would be from 1 year to the next year. So we'd say, when was there a decrease? Well, from the number of girls, so let's have a look. We've got 1991 and 1995. So 1991, there's a decrease from 94 to 95, and 91, there's a decrease from 90 to 90, at least from 4 to 2. So it's simple. All you're doing is reading straight off the graph. So it would be 1991 and 1995. All right. In which year was there the greatest increase in pregnancies? So which year was the greatest increase in pregnancies? You've gone from 4 to 10. See, 3 to 4? No, there's a 1 difference. 4 to 2, it's a decrease of 2. 2 to 4, it's an increase of 2. 4 to 10 is an increase of 6. That's an increase of 1, a decrease of 2, and an increase of 3. So it is here. All right, so it's going to be 1993. And there you also, people, just reading straight off the graph. Now, what was the percentage increase? Show your calculations. So if we want to look at the percentage increase, we're looking at 10 learners out of 400. But we're also looking at the increase of the process. So we are going to do this. We're going to say first, we're going to take 100%. I can't put percent there. So 100 divided by 400 girls. So, okay, we're going to put it in brackets here. That's the 100% that we're working at. The 400 here is going to be the total girls. It's just I'm writing this here so that you never do this when you're calculating, but it's so that you understand what I'm doing, okay? Times the 10 girls, and they were the ones that got pregnant, okay? And that is going to give you, if you calculate that, that's a quarter, so it's 25%, but you've got 2 noughts, so you move it back. Times 10 is going to give you 2.5%. of the total number of learners. What percentage of girls were pregnant during this year? Show your calculations. So if we have a look at what percentage were pregnant during that year, it's going to be there were 10 out of 400 learners. So if there were 10 kids out of 400 learners, so it is 1/40th, which is going to be 0.25%. Am I correct? You're going to have to check these calculations. I don't have a calculator, so I'm doing them all out of my head. All right, so if we move on, question 2.6, state the possible reason for the lower number of pregnancies during the first 4 years. Okay. I'm just looking here. It's about, sorry, it's going to be 2.5% as well. I was looking at the noughts there. All right, state the possible reason for the lower number of pregnancies during the first 4 years. People, you can come up with anything here. You can say they were taught sex education at school. Those are still the days when they did Bible studies at school as well. So you had religious education or religious instruction at school as well. You can also say that possibly there was far less TV that was quite, that showed as much detail as it does. Any reasonable answer there that makes sense, you would have got your marks. I would have said that those are the days when they still used to do quite formal sex education at school, and you had the whole religious instruction, and people were very, very stern and strict. All right. If you then look, the next question says an increase in the number of pregnancies over the last 4 years. Sure, you can bring in inadequate sex education at school. You can talk about drugs and the fact that drugs are so easily obtainable. You can talk about alcohol abuse. You can talk about just a total decline in society and what society accepts and doesn't accept. We have become quite promiscuous. That's why we're sitting with the issues of HIV and the state of HIV at the moment. We are allowing far more things than were accepted in previous years. What do you regard as the most detrimental effect of such high levels of pregnancies amongst teenagers? Well, how would it affect? You've got an increase in the percentage of school leavers. You've got things like the economy. A girl falls pregnant. How does she cope with that baby? She still isn't quite in adult mode. And I'm not saying teenagers are not adults. You are. But it's very difficult to go from being protected and depending on your parents to now having to be independent because you now have this baby. And you've got another little being that's going to be looking to you. And the same things you're going to get angry, that you get angry with your parents about, this little being's going to get angry with you. Are you able and mature enough to deal with a situation like that? So there are a lot of aspects you could bring in here as well. And I'm not going to dictate them to you. But think carefully and wisely when you get a question like that. Don't try and be smart and give a smart answer. You'll get naught. You need to be able to say, these are the facts and they are based on ABC. All right. And well, that's it pretty much for today. I hope you've enjoyed today's lesson. I hope you've learned a lot. Please remember, your sperm cells are haploid, your egg cells are haploid. The two join to form a diploid zygote during the process of fertilization. So first you have ovulation, the release of the egg cell. Then you have fertilization occurring. Then you have implantation. And only at implantation do you actually say the female is now pregnant. All right? So remember the 28-day cycle, and nothing is written in stone, as each person is an individual. And different circumstances in the environment and pollution will all affect that menstruation cycle. So until I see you again, have a wonderful time, work hard, and remember, what you put in is what you are going to get out. Have a good one. Cheers.